Hi, everyone. I'm Tom Antisdale with Alex Partners. I'm a partner in our risk and compliance practice. And today I'm joined by Geoff David, who is head of litigation at Rio Tinto, the global mining company. Geoff, thanks so much for taking a few minutes to chat today. Maybe just to dive in, we'll focus, a question maybe on your background, because you have a really interesting background, having been a partner at a major law firm, and now, of course, you're in-house. How would you compare those two roles? What would you say is maybe the biggest similarity and also the biggest difference between being in-house versus at a law firm?
No, thanks, Tom. And first, thanks to you, Tom, and to Alex Partners for inviting me to talk with you today. Really appreciate it. And hopefully people find our conversation useful as we go forward. So the commonalities between them, obviously, we provide legal advice. So we're in-house counsel. That's a judgment that's made by a lot of companies to bring partners or attorneys in to provide more business-minded advice when they're providing their legal advice. And I'd say that's probably the biggest difference between outside and in-house counsel. It's really the lens through which you're looking at the problem. As outside counsel, you're oftentimes many steps away from the end decision making that actually happens in a case investigation. It's a little bit more sanitized in terms of what you're actually dealing with. You don't get a sense of the problems that the business is actually facing. What we like to say is probably at the coal face in our industry. So what I'd say is then on the flip side, when you're an in-house counsel, you really get that sense of the people that are impacted, the other stakeholders, whether it's a government, whether it's your communities, they're actually impacted by your decisions, and what you're doing really matters. And the day-to-day decision, you can actually see the impact that you're making within the company and then especially outside of the company as well.
Really interesting. Thanks, Geoff. I think we're in a pretty active regulatory environment. Most people would say, at least in the U.S., in other geographies as well. What would you say is your biggest challenge in this current environment?
Well, we're a global mining company. We operate in over 30 different countries, and with all those different countries and locations, not only do we have the different regulatory schemes that are out there in different countries, but then we also have the communities that we're working with the different populations that we're surrounded with. We have our different business stakeholders that we have that we're trying to manage as well. So each of those brings a different layer of complexity, and especially when, as you noted, with a heightened risk as the ever-changing world of compliance goes forward over the last 20, 30 years, what we've seen is only an increase in diligence from different governments, as different governments have also started to implement new regimes in their countries as well. That's a new layer of complexity. And what I'd say is probably the biggest challenge is staying on top of those things and making sure that we're operating in their best practices, because sometimes you do find a way where that Venn diagram doesn't necessarily 100% overlap. And so if you're trying to comply with the particular government's laws, you might be maybe upsetting the apple cart somewhere else when you're working with the community locally. And so you have to balance those two pieces as you move forward, and really try to make sure you're putting your best foot forward on both sides.
Along those lines, Geoff, what strategies have you found most effective for managing, sort of mitigating compliance and risk globally?
Well, certainly. Well, so I'm not our chief compliance officer. We have a great chief compliance officer who deals with that on a daily basis. I deal with it mostly at the back end, and certainly a little bit when we're advising at the front end on compliance issues on the legal side. So my best way to do it is actually it's a culture thing, and you're going to hear me probably talk about that more as we go along. It's breeding the right culture, and that's really what we're trying to develop a lot at Rio Tinto, as well as focus on a good culture, because the rest is really I think what our CEO usually says is culture eats strategy for breakfast, which I actually think is really true. Because if you don't have a good culture, you can have the best guidelines, best procedures, best policies, but unless you actually bring them to life through a good culture, it's impossible to do through a 50,000 person company, which we are. So I think it's really trying to reinforce and to encourage people to be courageous in what they need to stand up for, doing the right thing, showing care when they're doing it, and be curious about trying to figure out what the best way is going forward as well. So I think really, especially in our jobs as attorneys, we really have to have a strong backbones, very principled way of going about it, but also show that we're actually empathetic in the way that we're focusing those problems, because the different people that we're working with across the globe might not see the problems that we see, because we might see, they might percolate in the US or the UK or Australia, or different regulatory environments that are entirely different from some of the other countries in which we operate. So I think the thread that carries us through all of that is going to be a good culture in the way that we operate as a company.
Having touched on your international scope, and also, the mining industry obviously has a lot of intricacies. How important is it for you to not only stay on top of Rio Tinto's business, but also the legal and political landscapes and all the different jurisdictions around the world where you operate?
No, it's, it's the primary important piece that I would say, which is the value add of a strong legal governance and compliance team at any company. So staying on top of that is going to be very important. So the problem is that it is complicated. It's intricate in the way that we do it. So I think we have different teams that are complementary in what we do. So we have our legal team that focuses very much on front end laws that might be actually implemented, but we also have a really strong external affairs team that's working with governments, trying to make sure that we're staying on top of the laws that are going to be put in place before they're actually there, to make sure that we're influencing in the right way, whether it's with non-governmental entities, working with our partners to make sure or other industry groups, to make sure that we have an idea of what the best practice is going forward, so we're not surprised by anything. And obviously, it's an ever-evolving political landscape as well that we have to make sure that we keep an eye on, whether it's where we're actually operating a mine or a smelter, or are actually selling our products as well.
So it sounds like, even though you have coverage for litigation as your sort of main area, you're interfacing a lot with other parts of the company, from both a legal and political landscape point of view.
Yeah, for sure. I think any decision, just like anywhere, to think one of our, going back to your first question, which is what is the biggest difference between being in-house and outside counsel? In-house counsel, you're now thinking about the ramifications of your decisions in a much different way. You can give very sanitized advice as outside counsel, trying to help the business understand what the ramifications of the decisions are, but you don't actually have the line of sight about what the business actually is. So now, as in-house counsel, when we're working, we're saying, okay, so who are our internal stakeholders? How could this decision impact the rest of our business? Not just in the micro problem of whatever litigation we're doing in whatever jurisdiction, but is there any potential for this to impact in other jurisdictions? Not just in a litigation standpoint, but how a government or a community or a non-governmental organization might actually interact or react to whatever we're doing, or whatever stance we're actually taking. So that's really the value. One of the major value adds, I think, of an strong in-house counsel is actually knowing the network and be able to tie those different pieces together.
And what advice would you give someone just starting an in-house job? Maybe they just came from a law firm, in terms of how to be valued by the rest of the senior business and leadership team, as opposed to being viewed as just a lawyer, we'll say.
Right. No, I think that's always that's always hard. And listen, the way that lawyers are viewed in different jurisdictions is very, very different. So while in the U.S. we might have a one opinion of what the lawyer might actually bring to the table, it might be very different in a different situation. So I'd say, just like dealing in anything, one, be humble. You don't know everything, and certainly coming into the business from an external counsel point of view, you don't. So be curious in the way that you're going about it. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to actually dig into the detail and have an understanding, and figure out what your value add is, where you can really help, and always make it about the business, make it about the greater good, and not about yourself.
Makes total sense. So we'll close with a fun question, so to speak. And given
fun, Tom.
Yeah, they're all fun, but like we'll try and get something a little more entertaining for the last one. So your business is all over the world, including in some really exotic locations. I've seen the large Tonka trucks that your industry uses. Curious if you've ever ridden in one of the big Tonka trucks, by the way. But what's the coolest travel destination you visited? Or I don't know if you can share a story from what we're doing there in terms of somewhere interesting in the world as part of your job.
Right. So one, no, I have never ridden in a one of the giant trucks, but they're quite amazing as far as like just a feat of engineering alone, let alone the mines that we build and operate around the globe. But those the trucks and the automated trains and the automation that's involved is just mind blowing as far as the advancements of science and technology there. But as far as the exotic location that I've been to, so I've been all around the globe when we operate in some very exotic locations in Africa, South America, um, and uh, and in Australia. But I haven't been able to visit any of our locations because of COVID in Africa yet. But so the best location, most exotic place would probably be in Australia. I had the great opportunity of visiting one of our Pilbara mines there and also having a tour of some of our indigenous sites out there and the way that we're partnering with a lot of our indigenous populations um, certainly in Western Australia is really cool to see. And so for me, culturally, it's exotic. It's very much, I was born in Texas, grew up in New York. And so to be halfway around the world in a completely different culture and something that's completely foreign in the way that I was raised and yet still that continuity and the thing that actually binds us together is that we're all people. I think it's just a pretty cool piece. And so to see how things have grown up, millennia ago is just probably leaves me in awe at the end of each trip that I make out there.
Sounds like a long way from Brooklyn.
It's a long way from Brooklyn.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Geoff, for taking some time today. Really appreciate it.
No, thank you, Tom. Really appreciate you and the partners at Alex Partners. Thank you so much.